Hello and welcome to the Armenian News Network Groong. I'm Hovik Manucharyan. In this Conversations on Groong episode, Asbed Bedrossian and I will be talking about the Turkish Armenian Normalization process that is going on between the two countries and the potential impact on the Armenia-diaspora relations. This episode was recorded on Friday, January 7, 2022.
One of the outcomes of the capitulation agreement that Armenia signed to end the 44-day war was that it committed to unblocking all economic and transport connections in the region, primarily, of course, referring to opening communication links between the mainland of Azerbaijan and Nakhichevan. Events following the November 9 agreement indicate that Armenia is working towards a larger regional plan that includes normalization of relations with Turkey as well as establishing a final peace deal with Azerbaijan. The Armenian government claims that it has received such a mandate from Armenian voters as a result of the June 20, 2021 parliament elections. Obviously, Turkey's blockade of Armenia shortly after Armenia gained independence in 1991 and the lack of diplomatic relations between them is a major obstacle to fulfilling Pashinyan's goal of bringing an era of peace in the region. To this effect, we've seen attempts by Turkey and Armenia to normalize relations following the war. Both countries have appointed envoys to work towards this goal. Now, to talk about these issues, we are joined by Harut Sassounian, who has been the publisher of the California Courier newspaper since 1983. He is also the president of the Armenia Artsakh Fund, a non-profit organization which has delivered to Armenia and Artsakh $947 million of humanitarian assistance since 1989. He is currently engaged in forming the Diaspora Armenian Parliament through local elections. Hello and welcome, Harut. Thanks for coming on our show.
Hello, Harut.
Thank you, Asbed and Hovik.
It's great to have you. Happy New Year to everyone. This is our first show of the new year.
Happy New Year.
All right. Just as I said a moment ago, in fact, Armenia has already been around the block before, right? All three of Pashinyan's predecessors have attempted to improve relations with Turkey without success. Asbed Bedrossian attempted to open relations in the early 90s, but Turkey stopped that process after Armenia's successes in the first Artsakh War, specifically the capture of Kelbajar in 1993. Then, during Kocharyan's first term, the so-called Turkish Armenian Reconciliation Commission, TARC, I'll call it TARC from now on, was launched under the guidance of the U.S. State Department. The commission issued non-binding recommendations to the side and then ceased activities in 2004. During Serge Sargsyan's presidency, the two countries kicked the ball around for a while during football diplomacy, but the game was aborted without results. The Armenia-Turkey protocols were signed in 2009, but neither country's parliament ratified them. So here we are again. Harut, first thing, let's state, at least I believe, that neither of the two countries are about to pack up and leave the planet, so they obviously need to talk to each other and somehow find a modicum of getting along to have some kind of a relationship. Probably nobody's against these relationships. Would you agree?
Absolutely. I'm not against negotiations either, but there are some fundamental issues unrelated to whether we should have negotiations and relationship or not. The first is that Turkey and Armenia had open borders after independence of Armenia till 1993.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in 1993, as you mentioned, because of the attack in Kelbajar, Turkey closed the border from its side, and it's been closed ever since. Now, the first basic question is, what is the reason why Turkey insists and Pashinyan agrees to sit down at the negotiating table and to negotiate opening of the border? I fail to understand what is there to negotiate. The borders were open. Turkey decided to shut it down. And if Turkey decides in an hour from now, for example, to open the border will be opened. It's only shut down from its side. It's not shut down from the Armenian side.
Right.
So
right.
There's really nothing to negotiate, to meet, to appoint envoys, to have preconditions or not have preconditions, to make a big deal out of this. Turkey can open the border, as I said, in today if it wants to.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the first thing. The second issue in terms of sitting at a table with Turkey is, it's not so much that we're sitting at a table with Turkey. You can negotiate with the devil if you want, as long as at the end of the day, you get something to your benefit. If it's beneficial to you, then you can talk to anybody. doesn't have to be your friends. And usually you don't negotiate with friends. You negotiate with people you have problems with and your enemies. So the key question there is, who is it who's gonna represent your country at those negotiations?
Mm-hmm.
Now, Turkey has appointed a seasoned, experienced diplomat who's been in diplomacy for 40 years, has worked in a number of countries as a Turkish diplomat, including Turkey's ambassador in Washington in recent years.
Right.
And he also had a high-ranking positions at the foreign ministry in Turkey. So there's no question that Erdogan has appointed a very competent and knowledgeable person from the Turkish side.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when it comes to Armenian side, Pashinyan decided to appoint Rupen Rupinian, who is a member of his political party, a high-ranking member. And this guy has practically no experience in diplomacy. And I'm not sure how is it he's going to sit down across the table from a highly experienced diplomat. And Turks in general are very good in diplomacy.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Their experience goes back to all the way to Ottoman Empire of hundreds of years. So I sort of sarcastically compare the two sides with a wolf sitting on one side of the table and a lamb on the other side, and the outcome is predetermined. It's obvious. So it makes a big difference who's going to sit there. And when Pashinyan and some of his party leaders were asked, why did you appoint this guy? He doesn't have experience. The answer they came up with was just amazing to me. They said, well, experience is not that important. It's secondary. What's important is that he represents the platform and the party of the prime minister.
Yeah.
Well, there's some relevance to that argument, that the person has to enjoy the confidence of the leader, but that person has to know what they're doing. And unfortunately, the problem just doesn't lie with this guy, even though this guy is taking on a very critical task representing Armenia with Turkey. Unfortunately, we see that Pashinyan's appointments are notoriously unqualified people, whether they're ministers or key advisors, or recently we went through the spectacle of appointing a totally inexperienced person as Armenia's ambassador in Washington. So this doesn't come as a surprise that Pashinyan would appoint one more unqualified person for such an important task.
Yeah, these appointments definitely seem to be based on an ever-shrinking circle of trusted loyalists, rather than any kind of competence in the roles they're assuming. Maybe given the fact that we have somewhat of an unequal set of negotiators around the table, maybe it's better not to have topics that are extremely sensitive. So, for example, when Turkey is saying that we should leave the Armenian genocide to the historians, maybe this is not the right time for us to, when I say us, later we're going to talk about the diaspora versus the Republic, but maybe this is not the time for the Republic to really discuss those issues anyway, because we don't have the right people around the table.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's my biggest fear, that no matter what topic, whether it's genocide or treaties, territories, relations, whatever it is, they're going to mess it up.
Yeah.
I have no confidence in these people because they don't seem to know what they're doing. And there are a lot of experts in the diaspora, which we'll come to later on, will be very happy to advise and consult. But these people are not interested in listening to anybody's advice. They think they're arrogant enough to think they know everything. I wish they did. Would have been very happy if they knew what they were doing, but they don't. And they don't want to learn either, which is the worst combination.
Harut, obviously Turkey was not a member of the trilateral November 9 statement, but implicitly we know that Azerbaijan wants to open the so-called Zangezur corridor, not only to establish contact with Nakhichevan directly or have a shorter route to it, but also to have a shorter route to Turkey. And I believe some politicians, including Nikol Pashinyan himself, have at various times mixed the purpose of the November 9 statement, where they, try to imply that actually the process of opening negotiations with Turkey is related to the November 9 agreement, or is some kind of an obligation rather than a choice. So I wanted to ask you explicitly, is relations with Turkey, do you think it's an obligation or more it's, are these separate things that, Armenia should treat separately?
Well, in my opinion, the November 9 statement has absolutely nothing to do with Turkey directly, because Turkey is not one of the signatories of that statement. It's only Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Russia, even though Turkey participated with Azerbaijan in the war on Artsakh. But this issue does not start with November 9 to 2020. As Asbed mentioned earlier, it goes back to the last almost 30 years where different presidents have thought of a similar initiative, and each one of them was bungled and failed at the end. And we don't know what's going to happen this time. I'm not very optimistic. And when they asked me, what do you think? Do you think they will succeed? I said, well, it's contingent on one key factor, how much Pashinyan is willing to concede, make concessions to Turkey and possibly to Azerbaijan in order to make this happen. If he makes a lot of concessions, of course it will happen. So the question is not whether it will happen or not, it will happen under what conditions and what terms. Mm-hmm. So this goes back several decades, this idea of opening border, or what they call normalizing relations between Armenia and Turkey, is not really key. It didn't start last year. But furthermore, every time Pashinyan talks about opening the communication lines, the roads, or what Azeris and Turks called the Zangezur corridor. Mm-hmm. Now, I would have no problem if Pashinyan would answer by saying, we lost the war, we're the losing side, we're the defeating side. I signed a statement under duress, and now I can't get out of it because it will mean a disaster to Armenia. I'm forced to go along with what I signed because Putin also signed on it, and those big powers, they're going to force me to abide. If he had said that, that's a common sense, understandable, logical answer. But that's not what Pashinyan says. He hasn't said that once in a little over a year. What he says is opening the roads is in Armenia's national interest.
Right. 100%.
We'll be more than happy to open the roads because Armenia will benefit tremendously from these roads.
Right. He has talked about the economic benefits, as a matter of fact.
Right, economic benefits. I happen to disagree with that analysis. Mm-hmm. I have serious concerns, and many economists have serious concerns about opening particularly the border with, there are two different types of problems. One, opening the border with Turkey is a separate issue from opening the border with Azerbaijan. Mm-hmm. That's not the same thing. With Turkey, even long before the border opening, every year we had a flood of cheap Turkish products coming in and flooding the Armenian market economy to the detriment of Armenian producers. So imagine what happens if the border is open and Turkey can directly send stuff across the border rather than sending it through Georgia, which adds transportation cost to the price. So I'm afraid that Turkish products will flood Armenian market even more than in recent years. Mm-hmm. And that will be to detriment of our Armenian producers. The reason Turkish products are cheaper because they have a population of 82 million people. So in economics, they call it economies of scale.
Yeah.
So when you have large quantity of something you build, then the price goes down per unit. Whereas Armenia has a very small population, what they produce is for very few people, so it's more expensive. So they cannot compete with Turkish products.
Yeah. Can you explain why this is the right time for Pashinyan to initiate these normalization negotiations?
Well, I believe it's the very wrong time to do this for a simple reason. A leader who was in charge of the country when the country suffered a devastating loss mm-hmm. is not really in the right frame of mind, neither mentally, nor morally, nor politically, mm-hmm. to conduct normal negotiations with our adversaries. When you're a loser, you have a defeatist mentality. You've already conceded so much territories and everything else mm-hmm. That you're on a road to concessions rather than on the ability to defend your national interest.
And we have seen this throughout 21.
Yes, we have, and it's getting worse on a daily basis. That's why I called a little brazenly, but I called for Pashinyan's resignation after the defeat. which is something any leader anywhere in the world would do if they suffered such a major defeat. They would resign on their own, thinking that, okay, I bungled this, now I'll leave and let somebody else take over and have a fresh start. But Pashinyan disagrees with us, and he says his reasoning is, I'm going to stay in power so I take corrective action and correct a lot of the problems, which is a very ironic statement by him, because he's the cause for all these problems.
Yeah.
The person who caused it cannot be the same person who's going to correct the mistakes.
Right.
I resemble it sarcastically to a man who burns a forest, and then he says, I'm going to be in charge of putting out the fire. He's the one who caused the fire to begin with. So it's the wrong time to do it. The defeated leader with the defeatist attitude is not the proper, doesn't have the proper frame of mind to sit down on an equal basis and negotiate with anybody, whether it's Azerbaijan or Turkey or Russia or anyone else.
Yeah, you mentioned that Turkey appointed a very seasoned diplomat, Serdar Kilic.
Right.
He was, of course, the ambassador to the United States when Erdogan, I think, visited Washington, D.C. There were protesters and rioters who got beaten by Erdogan's bodyguards and everything. Kilic himself, I think, is a genocide denier, and he has worked ardently in that direction. What is the signal of his appointment for Armenians?
Well, obviously, as ambassador to the U.S., he lobbied day and night against the recognition of the genocide by the U.S. Congress, by the beating of the protesters that you mentioned in Washington, D.C. But separately from that, I mean, that's his task as a representative of a government that denies the genocide, is anti-Armenian, anti-Kurdish, anti-everything else. But to me, the more important aspect is his being an experienced diplomat. And Erdogan has appointed such a high-level person, and we don't have the equivalent of such a person on our side. At least not the person that Pashinyan has appointed. I'm sure there are Armenians who are qualified to be sitting on the other side of the table, in Armenia or in the diaspora. But again, Pashinyan puts his weight on the relationship to his party. To party affiliation is more important to him than diplomatic experience.
I wanted to go back to a previous statement. You talked about flooding Armenian market with Turkish products. What do you think about not just that, but if relations are established, then actually Turkish direct investment or even Azerbaijani direct investment in Armenia and the so-called essentially bottomization of Armenia? Is that a risk that you see?
Well, let me clarify something. Right now, not in the case of Azerbaijan, because Azerbaijan is still considered the enemy country, and surprisingly not so with Turkey, even though Turkey is equally as much of an enemy, both from past experience and more recent war. But right now, any Turkish investor can come to Armenia and invest, buy a building and whatever. There's no prohibition of Turkish investment. It has nothing to do with the border. They will fly in and buy anything they want. And I know I've discussed this issue with previous presidents. I've told them, I said, Mr. President, either forbid Turkish citizens from investing and buying lands in Armenia. After all, Armenia is a very tiny country, and land is relatively cheap compared to other places. So a well-to-do company or a person can buy a huge amount of land, which Armenians can ill afford to give it to outsiders. And President said, no, it's fine. We will make it easy for them to buy things. I told him, I said, at least what you should do is have some kind of a duty on the products coming in, so that it will protect the local economy, which is something many countries do, including the US, around the world. But the president also refused that. And more surprisingly, Turkey, for a number of years now, has a list of countries that are banned from buying land in Turkey. Some other countries' citizens can buy land in Turkey, but others cannot. So Turkey already has that prohibition, those prohibitions, but Armenia refuses to even consider such a thing. And of course, with Pashinyan now, he thinks it's a great thing. Probably if you were to ask him, he would say, it's wonderful. We would like to encourage them to invest in Armenia.
You said you talked to the president of Armenia. Would you be able to tell me what time frame? Was it recent or previous? In previous administrations?
It was previously. I mean, I don't like to disclose too many private conversations, but since you asked and it's time has passed, it was President Manucharyan with whom I had this discussion about protecting Armenia's industry and economy.
Okay.
Harut, given that these normalization negotiations are going to take place, and in fact the first meeting is next Friday on the 14th, I believe,
right,
in Moscow, what should be the agenda of these negotiations? What should be included? What should be excluded, in your opinion?
Well, both sides are saying that they are going to negotiations without any preconditions.
Mm-hmm.
So Armenia supposedly neither willing nor will raise any kind of issues that we normally think of when we think of Turkey, like recognition of genocide or return of territories or restitution for the genocide losses. Armenia will not do any of those things because they don't believe in it to begin with. And Turkey, for years now, now they keep saying without any preconditions, they're coming to the table. But we know that in 2009, there were preconditions. And the reason that the protocols failed is because when it came time to ratify, the Turkish government insisted, after signing it, that the Armenia should agree to the return of Artsakh territories to Azerbaijan, which Armenia refused, and Turkey didn't ratify. And of course, Turkey was also pressured by Azerbaijan to not have open borders with Armenia in order to squeeze Armenia economically to make concessions to Azerbaijan.
Mm-hmm.
So
what are they going to sit and talk about?
Even though the Turkish side keeps saying no preconditions, but forget about the preconditions that they said in the past, which was Armenia should stop pursuing international recognition of Armenian genocide. Armenia should recognize the territorial integrity of the Republic of Turkey, etc. Those things are now, and also the third precondition was return of the Artsakh territories to Azerbaijan. Now, that last precondition is already mostly accomplished through force by Turkey and Azerbaijan. So that's sort of now off the table. But the first two are still there, even though Turkish leaders in recent time, they haven't brought that up. But more importantly, they brought up two new preconditions. While saying that there's no preconditions. One of them, they say that Armenia has to sign a peace treaty with Azerbaijan, which means that Armenia has to recognize Azerbaijan's territorial integrity, which means that Artsakh and Nakhchivan are for good recognized by Armenia as being part of Azerbaijan. And the second precondition, which Turkey insists on, is what they call the Zangezur corridor, which repeatedly Armenian side has explained it's not a corridor, it's just a transportation road between
transit.
Azerbaijan on the east and Nakhchivan on the west. But the Turks and Azerbaijan, both of them insist on the Zangezur corridor. And furthermore, to make it very clear to even the most non-suspecting listener, Turkey repeatedly has said in recent weeks that we are in close contact with Azerbaijan. We will do nothing contrary to Azerbaijan's wishes, which is not a surprising announcement. But once again, we're bringing external factors into supposedly opening the border between Armenia and Turkey.
Yeah, I simply don't understand why they would be sitting down with the Turks right now when we are at the nadir, absolute nadir of our strength post-independence. We have a gun pointed to our heads, basically. So just like you said, it just doesn't make any sense to me. Can you talk a little bit more about why the previous efforts failed? You mentioned about why I think the football diplomacy failed. They did not ratify because they wanted post-conditions, basically, that Artsakh be given up. What can we bring to the table as experience from those failures forward to these normalization negotiations?
Well, just to finish my last point on the previous question about the preconditions, when the meeting starts on January 14 in Moscow, and the minute they sit down, and if they hear any comment from the Turkish side that they have a precondition contrary to what they promised, then Armenia's representative has two options. And I'm okay with both options. And I reject the third option of sitting there and continuing the conversation and not be bothered that Turkey once again has lied to the Armenian side. There are no preconditions. So the Armenian side cannot just sit there and continue and do business as usual. They either have to get up and walk out of the room, which I don't think they will, or they can say, fine, if you have preconditions, so do we. And in fact, we have more right to put preconditions because we're the victims of Turkish repeated massacres and genocide and lost territories and that. So fine, if you want to speak the language of preconditions, we have our own preconditions. We'll also put that on the table and see how far we're going to get. And of course, that will shortly collapse like it did in the past. Now, your next question was, what have we learned from the experience of the past? Let me start with TARC. TARC was a sort of a different kind of an animal. It was not to open the border between Turkey and Armenia. It was to reconcile between the two sides, mostly on the genocide issue. And of course, there was a lot of controversy. The Armenian side wanted the genocide recognition. Turkish representatives said, no, it's not genocide. Finally, they gave it to a third party for arbitration. And the third party said, if the genocide happened today, it meets the definition of the word genocide. So many words accepting that it was genocide. That's when the whole thing collapsed and the Turkish envoys walked out. So that was not the border issue. But the next time, example is 2009, when it was supposedly to open the border, but opening border, as I told President Sarkisian repeatedly, if that was the purpose, there would be just a one-sentence agreement. Both sides agree to open their mutual borders, period.
Right.
But if you go back and look at the text of the protocols, it's pages and pages of conditions, demands, requirements. And so this goes much beyond just open border. The Turks were just taking advantage, and they wanted to squeeze concessions out of the Armenian side over the Armenian demand of opening the border. So Armenia resisted those preconditions, but many of them found its way in the text of the protocols before they were even signed. Like Armenia and Turkey will not meddle in a third country's internal affairs, which was a indirect but not so indirect reference to Artsakh, which had nothing to do with Turkey-Armenia border. But all these things found their way into the text of the protocols. And then when it was signed and was time to ratify, Aliyev was furious at Erdogan for trying to cut a deal with Armenia while Artsakh was still occupied by Armenia. They pressured, they threw a fit. They even shut down Turkish schools in Azerbaijan, shut down some Turkish mosques. So it became quite hostile, the relationship. Finally, Erdogan just said, because he probably keeps saying Azerbaijan and Turkey are one nation and two states. But when Aliyev was cussing them out, that was exposing the lie of being a one nation and two states. So Erdogan finally gave up on the protocols. So that failed because of that. Now we have the third go. On this third go, again, we're doing something that's wrong in terms of what Serge Sarkisian did with the diaspora. But Serge Sarkisian at least made half-hearted attempts to look at the pulse of the diaspora on this issue. He visited 5 countries ostensibly to see if he can convince the diaspora to go along. I've had hundreds of hours of one-on-one discussions, which turned into arguments and debates with him on this issue, which initially he dismissed. But finally, when the whole thing was falling apart, he told me, I accept you were correct and I was wrong, but I don't want to go too much into details. Now we have Pashin, who is not even half-heartedly trying to consult with the diaspora. He has completely ignored the diaspora. I'm not aware of a single diasporan of any kind from any side that Pashinyan has contacted or met with to just ask them what they think about this initiative. Now, of course,
right. There's no engagement, apparently.
Zero engagement. I mean, this is much worse than even Serge Sarkisian. And now, of course, the diaspora, we cannot vote in Armenian elections, and we cannot assume high-ranking position because it's not in the constitution. So we can't really, contrary to what the Turkish Foreign Minister Çavuşoğlu claimed, that the radicals in diaspora are going to undermine, and Armenia should not allow the radicals in diaspora to undermine this negotiations. I mean, it's good that Turks think very highly of the lobbying power of the diaspora. Let them get scared a little bit of our lobbying power. But the truth is, and we know this, that we really have no decision-making rights in the Armenian government. All we can do is what we're doing now is analyze, criticize, and disagree with what they're doing. At the end of the day, Prime Minister Pashinyan is the head of Armenian government, and it's his decision what he's going to do with Armenia, signing for Armenia. So even if he consults with us and we tell him, no, don't do it, it's wrong, he doesn't have to listen to us. He can still go ahead.
Absolutely.
But you would think that at least just to be kind and courteous, he would just pick up the phone and call a few people, whoever he wants, and say, what do you think? Just in case.
I just, on this note, even though the diaspora does not have any sort of constitutional rights in Armenia, that has not prevented, for instance, the government of Armenia for creating such fora for discussion. Like, for instance, I just thought of the forum that Pashinyan created with the extra parliamentary forces, where he every month meets and they have a whole multi-hour discussion about ideas, which he then, as the leader of the parliamentary majority party and other party leaders, then take. So I think that not having an explicit constitutional role, the diaspora is not limited just by that, and there are creative ways to do it. But as we are seeing, I'm dismayed that yet another Armenian government, this time is even more explicitly ignoring the Armenian diaspora, not even asking for their advice, even though they have the tools to work around the constitutional problem.
Well, let me say that extra parliamentary parties, they're not members of diaspora. They're Armenian citizens and registered parties in Armenia. So that's different from the consulting diaspora. But there's a second, more devious reason for Pashinyan to meet with these extra parliamentary groups, because he is refusing to acknowledge the credibility of the two opposition parties in parliament. So he's meeting with people outside the parliament to belittle or lessen the important role of those in parliament who are opposing him.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
We've been talking about the divisions inside the Armenian camp. What about the Turkish camp? Should we assume that they are a monolithic entity? I know the government certainly controls the policy, and Turkey has a very mature long-term foreign policy and Armenian policy. But why would Erdogan actually be doing this now, at a time when he's got his hands full on multiple scenes with the Russians and other countries? Is there any kind of a political gain for him domestically, for him to do this kind of an agreement with Armenia?
Well, that's an excellent question. It has two facets to your question. One is the internal and one is the external or foreign. Internally, his party, which is the majority party, has an alliance with a minority party, the Cumhur Party, which was the former Atatürk party.
Yeah.
And they are much more radical, much more anti-Armenian than even Erdogan's party is.
Those are, I think, the National Movement Party, the super nationalist.
Yeah, CHP,
party,
or
right?
Is it the MHP?
The MHP, and the ruling party is the
sorry,
AKP,
I
think.
misspoke. The alliance between AKP is with MHP, the super radical party, and they're very anti-Armenian, even more than Erdogan and his party. So I'm sure they're not too happy, but they're in a corner because what is their choice? If they walk out of the alliance, they're a small party, they'll be completely nothing. Now, being the allies of Erdogan party, they have some influence over Erdogan. They can put their foot down on certain occasions. Mm-hmm. But if they walk out, they're just nothing. And elections will be coming up in Turkey. parliamentary elections in 2023. So this is the wrong time to separate ways. But in general, most of people in Turkey, they have no opposition to opening the border because there's going to, commercially, economically, they're going to benefit, especially the mayors of the towns on the close to the Armenian border. They're very excited over this prospect. They've been excited for a number of years because they're going to benefit economically because they've lost a lot of their population to, they've left those areas. They've gone to Istanbul and elsewhere. So they welcome it. And so there's not a major issue, of course, and the Kurdish party, they're not opposed to it. Even the Armenian member of parliament, Garo Paylan, who's a member of the Kurdish party, he kept announcing, I'm willing to serve as a go-between between the Armenian and Turkish sides. I would like to facilitate this. So there's some corners are very enthusiastic, others not so. But that's not the major aspect of Erdogan's issue with this initiative. His biggest concern is on the foreign side, on the external side. In recent years, while Erdogan's armies are conquering, attacking Syria, Iraq, Artsakh, Libya, and elsewhere, he is getting more and more isolated politically. The major one is from NATO, Europe, and the US. He's completely isolated there. There's sanctions against Turkey from US. Secondly, he has zero relations with Egypt because of the Islamic Brotherhood that Erdogan supports and Egypt is totally against. He has zero relationship with Israel because of various statements and attacks by Turks. He has zero relationship with Saudi Arabia and zero relations with the UAE. So Erdogan, in recent months, long before Armenia came on the table, has taken a lot of initiatives trying to repair mend the ties between Turkey and these surrounding countries. And I'm not even talking about hostility with Greece and Cyprus, etc. Countries that he can have normal relations with, that he's pissed them off and that they're turned off from him. So he's held meetings with the foreign minister of Turkey, with foreign minister of Egypt. Erdogan will be shortly next month flying to Saudi Arabia to meet the leaders there. And there was a meeting with the Prince of UAE that came to Turkey. And with Israel, there's constant messages sent by Erdogan, and even to an extreme degree of such steps. For example, on one hand, he constantly is making anti-Semitic statements and accusing Israel of committing Holocaust against Palestinians, which is a very sensitive word and topic to accuse Israelis with. On the other hand, a couple of weeks ago, Erdogan had a meeting in his office with rabbis coming from different countries, had their rabbinic meeting in Ankara, and Erdogan welcomed them personally in his office and said the sweetest things to them. Again, intention is to have positive relations with Israel on the top of countries. Now, coming to Armenia, the relations with Armenia is something that's positively looked at by Russia, by France, and by the United States.
Yeah.
Secretary of State Blinken has said he supports those talks, and so has Lavrov, so has Macron, and I'm not even talking about Azerbaijan and Turkey.
Harut, since we're talking about internal political camps in Turkey and whether they all line up on an agenda or not, I think you mentioned the minority HDP party, which is mostly comprised of Kurdish or pro-Kurdish forces, and the eastern region of Turkey, the population there. I was just reading a tweet today from Ahmet Davutoglu, who is the president of the Future Party, but he was also part of AKP, Erdogan's party before, and he is also architect of zero problems with our neighbors policy. And he was commenting on the issue of Kazakhstan and why Kazakhstan sought support from the CSTO. He was against that, obviously. He said that, I think he alluded that the Turkic Council should deal with that matter. But he also made this statement. He said it's worrisome that upon these developments, support was sought from the CSTO, which is chaired by Armenia. I think he's one of the likely contenders he's viewed as one of the likely contenders against Erdogan. And at least some circles believe that he was more warm to opening relations with Armenia and more pro-Armenian than Erdogan himself, even though, if I could use that term. Even in that camp, there's such strong hatred of anything Armenian, I think, is very telling.
Well, no, you raised an important point that's not very well known in the West, and it's happened very recently with the problem in Kazakhstan, when Kazakhstan, of course, is a member of the CSTO, the military treaty with Russia and Belarus and several other Turkic states and Armenia. And Putin was quick to jump into it and try to rescue a republic that is important for Russia and want to keep it under its control. And CSTO, with Armenia and others being a member also, and when the president of Kazakhstan appealed to CSTO to send troops, Putin made sure that CSTO and Pashinyan, the current leader, will comply with that request immediately because it's in Russia's interest. Now, at the same time, as you mentioned, Kazakhstan is a member of the Council of Turkic States, which is led by Turkey. And before Davutoğlu's tweet that you mentioned, Erdogan spoke about that, and he said, we're ready to back our friendly Turkic state, Kazakhstan, but he did not say militarily. For all I know, behind the doors, his offer of sending military troops to Kazakhstan was probably rejected by the Kazakhstan president because he doesn't want to have a competition between Putin and Turkish, Russian and Turkish forces in Kazakhstan. He's happy to have received the okay of CSTO. Now, if CSTO had said no to Kazakhstan, most probably he would have then appealed to the Turkish states and Turkey to send in troops. But in general, Turks are not happy that Armenia now has soldiers in Kazakhstan, a fellow Turkic states. And the term they're using in Turkey is, we're not happy that there are Armenian boots on the territory of a Turkic state in Kazakhstan. So
that's very funny.
It's not just Davutoğlu; it goes beyond Davutoğlu. There's a widespread unhappiness with Armenia sending troops to Kazakhstan, and ironically, and I must mention,
and Armenia is not happy with Armenian boots on the Turkic country.
That's what I was about to say. There's widespread condemnation and criticism of Pashinyan by citizens of Armenia and the diaspora for sending Armenian soldiers to Kazakhstan. Why? Because one, Armenia did not benefit from CSTO protection, not only during the Artsakh war, which the Russians said, oh, that's not part of Armenia, but even when the Azeris encroached on Armenian territory, Putin said, well, let's try to find a diplomatic solution to the problem, not military. and secondly, the president of Kazakhstan congratulated Azerbaijan and Aliyev for recovering their territory of Nagorno-Karabakh, they called. And so Kazakhstan is no friend of Armenia, and we're sending troops there. Furthermore, there are 50,000 Armenian citizens living in Kazakhstan, and their livelihood may be in danger when they find out that Armenian troops are part of this suppression force against their democratic rights. And those who live there may suffer some nasty consequences as a result.
Yeah, and of course, I think this was an interesting tangential road, but I also want to mention on that topic that Azerbaijani fake media or fake profiles on social media are now spreading these warning messages in Kazakhstan that Armenians want to commit another, so-called Hocalı massacre in Kazakhstan, and essentially trying to put pressure on the local Armenian community for this. So yes, there are risks, but let's go back, Asbed, maybe we can go back to the topic at hand.
Yeah, one more thing interesting. If it had been the case that Turkish boots were to go to Kazakhstan, of course they would be opposing the Western forces that are supporting the so-called democratic riots over there. So it would be a very interesting situation for NATO to be supporting two sides of Kazakhstan there. Okay, let me sort of wind down on the normalization conversation, because I also want to talk with Harut about the diaspora and the Armenian genocide for as a closer. Harut, assuming that both sides are approaching these conversations from their national interests in mind, can you talk a little bit about what you expect are serious pitfalls and also maybe whatever opportunities may exist in these negotiations for us?
Well, obviously the opportunity is to have an open border, which some people believe it's positive for Armenia's economy. I happen to disagree, but some people legitimately mention that as a benefit. Of course, Turks have the benefit of, as I start saying in the last question, since they have damaged ties with several countries in the region, and the U.S. is pressuring Turkey into improving its relations with NATO and other allies, including Armenia. So Turkey will get a bonus point if they open the border and act like everything is normal with Armenia. That would be a positive PR for Turkey, both in the EU and in Washington. The pitfall, as I mentioned before, is that the Turks are coming to the table not just to open the border, which they can without going to any negotiations. They're coming in order to get something out of it in return, which means concessions from Pashinyan. And if Pashinyan makes concessions, and some people are very suspicious about giving up on genocide or territories, I happen not to think that that's what Pashinyan will do, even though I'm not happy with Pashinyan, but let's not blame him for every ill that Armenia has. But even any kind of a concession in return for border, an astute Armenian diplomat, if we had one sitting at the table, which we don't, would have realized that Turkey has much more to gain from opening the border than Armenia.
Right.
Politically, with the West. So an astute Armenian diplomat would try to get maximum benefit from Turkey for agreeing to open the border, especially at this time when we have a defeated Armenia, and Armenia is negotiating from a position of weakness. It's not the best time to negotiate with your biggest enemy when you're so weak. And at some other time in the future, maybe. But unfortunately, these discussions either are going to end with a disruption, disagreement, like in the past, or we're going to be lucky and we're going to get out of it with the open borders with minimal losses. Or the worst scenario is we're going to get really bad losses as a result of Pashinyan's being ready to constantly make concessions to Azerbaijan and to Turkey.
Yeah. Actually, just like you said a little bit earlier, the opportunities that I see are in the domestic environment for Turkey, because this is an opportunity for Erdogan at a time when neither the AKP or the MHP can get re-elected on their own. They need this coalition. And by doing some kind of an agreement here with Armenia, any kind of an agreement that opens the border and everything, they probably are able to take the thunder away from the People's Republican Party, which has better chances of getting re-elected at a time like this. So that's where I was looking for the domestic picture of what we may be able to use to our advantage. The people at the table with us have something to win domestically, rather than tit for tat versus Armenia. Let's turn just a little bit away from that normalization conversation to Armenia and the diaspora. You've written extensively about the diaspora and the relationships with Armenia. Now, a third of the worldwide Armenian nation lives in the Republic of Armenia, and 2/3 live in the diaspora. And a vast component of the Armenian diaspora was formed as a result of the Armenian genocide. You're a descendant of survivor grandparents, as are Hovik and I, descendants of survivor grandparents. So the independent Republic of Armenia is a member of the community of states and has access to international legal levers and resources. The Armenian diaspora does not. Is Armenia the appropriate or even an adequate representative of the diaspora's demands in negotiations like this? For example, when it comes to genocide recognition, reparation, what do you think?
Well,
and how do we represent ourselves?
Well, I'm going to divide your question into two parts. There's the legal pursuit, legal aspect, and the informal, unofficial aspect.
Yes.
When it comes to legal aspect, let's say taking our demands to the World Court, or it's called International Court of Justice, ICJ, there only nation states, countries have the right to bring up lawsuits there, not communities, not individuals, not political parties. That's completely different from national courts or even the European Court of Human Rights, where anybody can sue, let's say, Turkey from anywhere. But for the World Court, you have to be a country. So the diaspora has no role in a formal lawsuit with the World Court. However, we have the right to bring lawsuits, as I said, in national courts in different countries. There are some attempts made in recent years, mostly in the United States. There was a case in Argentina, and the case was started but not continued in Egypt with the Egyptian government and courts. So there's the national courts in various countries we can pursue our demands, and also there's the European Court of Human Rights, where Turkey is a member and is obligated to abide by its decisions. That's the legal aspect. The informal aspect, this is up to the Turkish government. If one day we get a halfway decent-minded Turkish leader who would like to put an end to this dispute with Armenians around the world, and constantly getting bombarded by resolutions and statements and comments and reminders, books, movies about genocide, one day a fair-minded Turkish leader can tell Armenian organizations in the diaspora, come over, let's sit down and discuss what happened in the past and what is it that we can do more than a century later. Now, when that happens, of course, the first issue is who's going to be from the Armenian side at the table. Again, we're going to have a little mess. Every Armenian organization feels entitled to be there, but we can't have 3,000 Armenian organizations around the world there. There's a very little known precedent about this, but most Armenians are unaware of. I've done a lot of research about this. It was back in 1989, I believe, 88 or 89, when Turkish foreign minister, it will come to me in a second, when he came to New York on a visit to the UN meeting, out of the blue, he picked up the phone and called the Armenian church in Manhattan. And he said, I would like to meet with you to discuss Armenian-Turkish problem. And the priest was scared out of his wits. He thought it was a joke. And he says, I'm the foreign minister of Turkey. The priest didn't believe it because it was just a funny call. So the priest immediately called the ARF bureau member in Washington. Said, I got such a call that he wants to meet with us. The ARF bureau member contacted the bureau in Beirut at the time. And the bureau decided that if the foreign minister of Turkey wants to meet with the ARF, that's too big of a risk for any one party to be there on their own. They invited the other two parties, Romgavars and Hunchags, and the three of them met initially just by themselves in Beirut. And then they agreed to meet with, I just remembered his name now, Çağlayan Gil was the foreign minister of Turkey back then. And they met with him in a hotel conference room in Zurich. And it was a fascinating conversation, which unfortunately most Armenians are not aware of. And of course, now most of the Turks never even heard of it. They don't know. And I plan one day, I have a lot of internal documents from this meeting. One day I hope to publish it in form of a book if I ever have the time.
And you're saying this is 1989, 1990?
I think he was foreign minister from 1977 to 1978.
But at the meeting, it was a fascinating meeting. Just to give you a little blurbs about the meeting. And the reason it's important to mention this is because it may happen again in the future. And unless we learn from the first, only one experience we've had, we have to be prepared for the next meeting if it ever happens. So at that meeting, Çağlayan Gil asked, what is it that you want from Turkey? What are your demands? And Shavash Torigyan, who was the representative of the ARF at the meeting, he said, we want our lands back, Armenian lands back. And Çağlayan Gil said, if I give you a positive answer, if I go to Turkey, they will hang me. I can't go back to my country if I say, yes, we'll give you your lands. But he offered an alternative, which is not fully acceptable to us. He said, but he says, I will see if I can make legal arrangements for Armenians who left Turkey to come back and live on the territory of Turkey. And the reason I say that that's not an acceptable option for us, because you're not going to be living in a state of Armenia. You're going to live in the Republic of Turkey. You're going to be a Turkish citizen, and your sons will be drafted into the Turkish army. I don't think too many Armenians want to serve in the Turkish army from the diaspora. So that didn't work out.
This is very interesting. I can't wait until you publish some of these notes and papers, Harut. I have to say, I was not aware of it.
Don't feel bad. I mean, just about every Armenian around now, and the three political party representatives who were at the meeting, unfortunately, they passed away. And the political parties have their minutes of the meeting in their archives. I was able to get most of it from them because they didn't want to disclose it to the outsiders. But I have most of it, and we'll see what we can do with it. But Çağlayan was very friendly, and he really seriously tried. In fact, he had decided to resign shortly before that meeting. But when he saw that the meeting was about to happen, he postponed his resignation to hold that meeting, which he considered very important. And of course, remember that the Turks had an alternative motive for initiating such a meeting. That was the time when there were a lot of assassinations of Turkish diplomats, and Çağlayan was trying to see what it would take to stop that, and in return try to make some concessions to Armenians. So that's what prompted him. So Çağlayan didn't resign, had the meeting, and at the end of the meeting, he said, well, let's meet again to continue this conversation. Unfortunately, that meeting, there was no continuation for that meeting. Then there was a coup d'etat in Turkey, and I think Hovik was right. It was 1978 and not 88. And the coup d'etat, and then Çağlayan was appointed interim president of Turkey for a short period. So that was really a unique opportunity for somehow coming to the table and doing. Of course, whenever someday Armenians are invited to come to the table, whether it's the Republic of Armenia or the diaspora, Armenian side will not get everything they want that they lost, nor the Turkish side is going to get away with giving up nothing. So there will be some kind of a trade-off.
Absolutely.
That's what negotiations are for.
It's going to be a negotiation.
You start with 100 and they start with 0, and then you meet somewhere in between.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we will talk a little bit about those. I hope you have your top 10 negotiating points ready when they call you. I have my 10 bullets ready.
I mean, since you were kind enough to have this discussion, let me disclose something that I've never disclosed publicly. During the years that I argued with President Sarkisian over the protocols, and I kept telling him why it's wrong, he shouldn't do it. He kept saying, no, he's right, I was wrong. So we went back and forth like this for months and months. And finally, at some point, when he saw that the Turks are not willing to go ahead with the protocols, he said, well, it looks like you were right and I was wrong. And he says, I would like to appoint you as my senior advisor on relations with Turkey. Of course, I wasn't looking for an appointment or a position, and I'm not a young kid that's enamored with titles and positions. So I knew there were some traps. Should I accept such a sensitive position? Anything that goes wrong in those negotiations, the president very conveniently will blame me for it. That was one pitfall. The other was, if I was in charge of the negotiation, I would have really started from 0 and not the text of the protocols that they had spent months and months preparing with the help of Russia, with the help of Hillary Clinton for the US and the EU. And if I had gone into Ankara with Davutoglu, who was the foreign minister then, and told him, okay, we're going to junk the text you have prepared after all these years, and I'm going to start from 0, he wasn't going to be happy, and he was going to complain to Hillary and Russia and Europe. And the president would have probably said, "Oh, Harut, you can't be so harsh and so extreme. You have to be accommodating." I would have said, "No, Mr. President, you wanted me to be in charge, and you said you were wrong. I was right." So if it's not going to go anywhere, why start it? So it didn't work out, and I don't know what would have happened if I'd accepted. And I mean, I know that I would have not accepted what the text that they had prepared. As I said, instead of 3 pages of text, it would have been just a line that said, "Turkey and Armenia open their mutual border," and that's it. No conditions, no demands, no other factors.
All right. A final question, Harut. Can the diaspora's agenda be separated from the Republic's agenda as far as negotiations like these go?
Well, this is a very critical question we're asking. A couple of points. First, Armenians, no matter where they are and who they are, they should sit down and work together and get their minds around the same topic. One of my favorite lines was during the 2009 protocols issues, where Armenia kept saying, "We need to learn to get along with Turkey." And my rebuttal was, why don't we first try to get along with each other? Armenians with other Armenians instead of Armenians with Turkey, which is far more difficult. We can't even get along with each other, let alone with Turkey. So my first suggestion would be for Armenians, no matter what side they're on, where they live, Armenia, diaspora, after all, we're all one nation. We went through a similar traumatic experience of the genocide, loss of people and loss of land. So we should all come together, sit down. It's okay if we disagree on certain points. That's fine, because we live in different parts of the world and we have different ideals and frame of mind, but we should at least talk to each other. Now, one of the benefits of talking to each other, and even if we disagree, is the following. Armenia is a country, is a nation state. Diaspora is just a community, minority living in different countries. So legally speaking, we're in complete different camps, different obligations and responsibilities. We're a community, they're a nation state. Nation state can do things that a community cannot, and the community can do things that the nation state cannot. So I can sit in Los Angeles and like I've done for the last 30 years, write column after column demanding Western Armenia. And if a leader in Armenia would seriously get up one day and address the nation and say, "I would like to recover Western Armenia," that would precipitate all sorts of repercussions for the Republic of Armenia and its security. So we're in different categories. So if we sit down around one table, which I can't believe that this hasn't happened all these years, except on individual levels, like between me and the previous presidents. But if this is done in an organized way, a serious manner, what we can end up with is the following. Regardless of our disagreements on certain aspects, we can agree on the following, that it's called division of labor. That means that the Republic of Armenia will take the task of carrying out certain things that it can carry out as a nation state, and the diaspora will take on certain tasks that can carry out as foreign citizens who are of Armenian origin, but they belong in different countries. They have leeway to do things that Armenia may not, and Armenia has leeway things that we do not.
So, Harut, if the diaspora is a community of communities, who is going to represent, quote unquote, the diaspora?
Well, I'm hoping that will be the topic of another discussion, where the diaspora elects its own representatives in each community, and the ones that the communities elect, they're the only ones who are entitled to represent the diaspora. No more self-appointed representatives of the diaspora.
I think this is a very interesting discussion. Thank you, Harut.
Yeah, we'll leave it there, Harut. Thank you very much. But we will come back and talk about this idea of a diaspora parliament. We'll make it a conversation soon.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
That concludes this Conversations on Groong episode, and we hope you found it useful. As always, we invite your feedback. You can find us on most social media and podcast platforms or our website, groong.org. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel on YouTube, like our pages, and follow us on social media. On behalf of everyone in this episode, we wish you a good week. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you soon.